Welcome back to another episode of the Get Marketing Answers podcast. Today, as always, we've got a real treat. Mr. Marcus Sheridan is in the house. Marcus is a keynote speaker. He helps sales, marketing, and leadership professionals connect deeper and win more trust. Also, author of They Ask, You Answer, ranked #1 LinkedIn top voice as well. Marcus, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. It's going to be a good day.
Well, I'm excited to have you. It's not too often that we get to talk with someone who's, just written a book that we just read. And so before we get into all that fun stuff, tell us a little bit about your journey, because as I've read in the book, it's a pretty interesting one, and how you got to where you are now.
Well, that's probably about 25 years worth of stuff, but I'll give you the really quick rundown, which is I started a swimming pool company in 2001 called River Pools, and we were doing our best to grow it, and then the economy crashed in 2008. Things went really sideways really quickly for a lot of pool companies. Thought we were going to file bankruptcy, but that's when we ended up, from that pain and struggle, doing some really creative and innovative things online that hadn't been done, even though I didn't really realize they hadn't been done. And we became the most trafficked swimming pool website in the world. And as I went on that journey, I started to teach people what we were doing. And that became a book. That book's called They Ask, You Answer. And They Ask, You Answer has now been embraced by companies all over the world, and been translated in many languages. And I've been able to now speak full time all over the world, and that's been really, really fun, right? Because I've gotten to see so many countries, so many cultures, and see just how similar most businesses are. They're way more similar than they're actually different, which I think sometimes people don't understand. But it's been a great ride, and They Ask, You Answer has a third edition that will be coming out in December, January as well. So a lot of cool things happening.
Cool. So Marcus, one of the questions that I had as I was going through the book, and as you talk about your transition with River Pools, and you talk about the economy, and you talk about kind of how you came about with, call it this revelation, this epiphany to really create almost a new space in marketing in my mind. Today, it's easy to look back and say, like, that just happened. But I'm curious, as business leaders and entrepreneurs, there's often time that kind of fork in the road where it's, I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's kind of that fight or flight moment. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more to kind of where you were in that space. And, just from a mental perspective, kind of took the decision to fight, as opposed to just say, you know what, I'm just the victim. It is what it is. And roll up shop.
The cool thing about being a business owner is that you have your whole life tied into the business, right? If I filed bankruptcy in 2008, I was going to lose my home. My business partners lost their homes, right? Our 16 employees would have lost their jobs. I really didn't have a plan B. It was like, I'm going to make this company work or else, but it's got to work. There's real beauty that comes in pain and suffering, because in business, it forces us outside of our comfort zone, and it takes us to this place where we say, you know what, I've been thinking for a while I should do this, I just haven't, right? Everybody's got that. There's things that you've been delaying that inherently you should do, yet you haven't done them. This is why when the economy goes south, generally that's the most innovative times we see in business, because people have to get creative and they just say, YOLO, I'm going to send it. And that's what I did. I was reading, we had the crash, and I'm just like, all right, I realized I'm changing as a buyer. I'm using the internet very, very differently. My behavior online is different. So therefore my customers, they're going to be the same way. I started to read all these fancy phrases like inbound marketing, content marketing, social media, blogging, but really what I heard in my simple pool guy mind was, Marcus, if you just obsess over your customers' questions, worries, fears, issues, concerns, and you're willing to address them on your website through text, through video, you just might save your business. And so I said, well, that's what we're going to do. And I literally called it They Ask, You Answer. I said, if anybody's got a question, we're going to answer it. I said, we're going to become like the Wikipedia of pools in our space. If anybody is thinking it, we're going to get on the front end of that conversation. And we talked about stuff that had never been talked about before, but it only took a couple months and I could tell, oh yeah, we're on to something here. This is going to be big. And it was pretty exciting at that point. It was like I was like that fat little 9-year-old playing, Super Mario all over again. And like, hey, that's a new world I just conquered. It's a lot of fun.
What
That's
kind of
incredible.
pushback did you get in the beginning, whether it be from self-doubt or from your team? Because as you know, in marketing, I mean, there's almost never any instant results overnight unless you throw thousands of dollars of gasoline on the fire, i.e. ads, which you probably weren't doing at the time.
Well, I would disagree with that, Chris. I think you can absolutely get results overnight. You just have to be willing to talk about and show what no one in your industry has ever been willing to talk about and show. I was up for that task. Let me give you an example. I mean, when I say I did things that had never been done, I mean I really did stuff that had never been done. So let me give some context here. So what I discovered is there's basically 5 subjects that every buyer researches before they reach out to a company. They want to know, how much is it cost? Okay. They want to get a sense for pricing, cost, etc. They want to know, what are the problems, the negatives, the issues with it. In other words, we'll just call it problems, but it's really fears or worries. They want to know, how does it compare to the other thing that they're looking at? So we'll call that comparisons or versus. They want to know what's everybody saying about it. Call that reviews, right? And they want to know the best it. So costs, problems, comparisons, reviews, best. We call that the big 5 in the book. That literally runs the economy of search. That is how you, me, we've all learned to research a company, to vet a product, to vet a service before we reach out to them. And we want these questions answered before we reach out. And so I said, well, how can I lean into these things? We were the first swimming pool company in the world to openly talk about cost and price on our website. First one. Now, you would think that's pretty obvious. Every single person, as soon as they get on a call, when it comes to a swimming pool, they're like, so could you give me a sense? What are we looking at here? Nobody had talked about that. But I didn't stop there. I did some really crazy stuff. So I came up with all different types of rating systems. Let me give you an example. So imagine it like this. We were, and this is in the book. We were like a Ford dealership, okay? And in our industry, we were selling fiberglass pools. There was about 10 major manufacturers of these fiberglass pools, kind of like automotive. But we were one of these dealers. So we were selling one of these main brands, like Ford, let's say. And I said to myself one day, I was literally like in a store and I was looking at the magazines and I saw this like car and driver magazine that had the awards for like best vehicles for that year. And I'm like, you know what? I bet you I could do that with pools. And so what I did is I came up with an award system for all the different manufacturers. And at the time it was called the best fiberglass swimming pool shapes of whatever year it was. And I said, I'm giving out an award to the best, let's say, diving pool, the best kidney-shaped pool, the best Roman in pool, the best rectangle pool. And I was literally giving these awards out, in the article, to the best in class for these manufacturers who I was selling against. So again, I'm like the Ford dealer that's giving an award to Toyota, that's giving an award to Mitsubishi or whatever. Now, what happened as a result of this? Immediately, these manufacturers are like, dude, who are you to do this? And I'm like, well, I mean, just a pool guy, right?
Yeah.
But suddenly the content started to get a ton of traction, like a lot of traction. And before I knew it, these same manufacturers were reaching out to me and saying, so Marcus, I see that we're not on your list. Maybe we could fly you out to our factory and give you a tour of some of our pools so that next time you do your list, we'll be on it. So I started doing that list every single year. Nobody had done anything like that. That is what gets immediate attention. I started creating best in class for swimming pool companies that I was competing against locally. So I remember one time somebody said to me, I was sitting, this is many years ago now, probably 13 years ago or something. And I was sitting with this couple in Richmond, Virginia for like 2 hours. And I gave them a quote for a pool. And at the end, they said, Marcus, we like you, but if we don't get this pool from you, is there anybody else that you might recommend? And I thought, tag on it. They're still looking. They're probably not going to buy. And they didn't buy, but they did ask the question, which was essentially, who are the best pool builders in Richmond, Virginia? Now, Richmond was a hot area for me. That's like my main area that I would sell pools. And so I said, could I answer that question online? Yeah. Could I come up with my top 5 list? Yeah. Would anybody in the world do this? No, probably not. Let's send it. Like, now, I can tell you, when I did that one, my 2 business partners were like, dude, what are you doing? You're literally like naming the best pool builders in Richmond, Virginia. They're our competitors that you've named here. And you didn't even put us on the list. I'm like, yeah, but they're on our website if they're reading this. So, and now, of course, today, if you're researching my competitors, oftentimes you're going to learn about them on our website. I mean, we just crush it. I mean, we just crush it. Any conversation that's happening, I want to be a part of that conversation. Now, that's what I mean by, like, you can stand out, but you have to be willing to talk about what others aren't willing to talk about, show what others aren't willing to show, and I'll add 2 more in there. You got to be willing to sell in a way that others aren't willing to sell, and you got to be more human than others are willing to be in the process. Last story about that. Sell in a way others aren't willing to sell. River Pools blew up and became a manufacturer. Now, we were the first manufacturer in the world to have a build and price your pool tool on the website, an actual pricing calculator. Now, think about this. We don't set the end price because we're selling as a manufacturer now, right? So the Ford dealer became the Ford. That's what happened with us, right? So we now have a dealership network. We can't have a calculator, can we? Because we're not setting the prices. Oh, yes, we can. We just can't give the exact price, but we can give a range. And that calculator became just this incredible cash cow for us because it was generating, during the summertime, hundreds of leads a day. So that's the power of meeting the buyer where they are. And that's what I mean by, if you want to stand out, you just got to be disruptive, and you can't do it like everybody else.
Let me throw something in there, Marcus. So when you went through all of this, when your story was becoming something, video was just starting to become, I wouldn't even say it was a norm, but it was being integrated into some digital marketing. And podcasts were a relatively new concept for most people. So knowing what we know today, and this is probably what the next version of the book is about, how does someone who's so heavy in video and podcasts, because yours was more so inbound marketing, correct? Which is blogging?
It was mainly content on our website. And we did become pretty prolific with YouTube over the course of time, certainly, yes. But we didn't do any social media because back then you really didn't need to. I would say today, if I was to start over again, I would absolutely have to lean a lot more into social as well. Because the world's changing. AI is changing that world. Google is changing. And I built a house on Google. It worked incredibly well. And it still does today, of course. But I wouldn't build a house on Google today.
What would you do outside of adding in social?
Yeah, well, so I wasn't thinking a lot about brand when I started this process in 2009. Brand became a byproduct of just having, again, talking about selling in a way that nobody had ever done in our space. That being said, I think what matters so much, especially as we move forward with everything that's happening with AI and AI search, that brand matters more than ever. And so everything comes down to, okay, how many signals can we send out to the world that is a signal to AI and a signal to the market that says, I need to pay attention to these guys, right? And so a signal can come from TikTok, a signal can come from your website, a signal can come from YouTube, but all the signals matter. It makes it harder to market today than it did in 2009. It's definitely harder, right? The content's more saturated. AI is changing the game of search. And, I don't even think paid is necessarily built to last, at least on Google. I think Google's business model is in serious trouble if they don't evolve it. I think paid on social is going to continue to work because social is a different beast than what is search. Search is the one that is ready for the most disruption, at least traditional search. And let's be honest, SEO was the greatest marketing tool we've ever seen, in the course of our lifetimes, right? That's not always going to be the case. So we've got to expand and we've got to get very involved with social. We've got to get very involved with video. And that's why, early on I was saying, listen, you can't just tell it, you got to show it. You got to see yourself as a media company. People are like, media company? What are you talking about, Marcus? Yeah, I mean, really, when I made the shift and I said, River Pools, they're a media company that happens to sell pools. That's it. Marcus Sheridan is a media company that happens to do speaking, that happens to do, book writing, but it's a media company, right? And when you think like that, you say, like me personally, I've got 2 videographers. Like me personally, I've got 2 videographers. Why? Because I'm a media company. That's the mindset that I have. That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, because if I'm going to be on these different platforms, I've got to have the ability to produce the content. And that's the sacrifice that I'm making. And so I think this is where, the shift has occurred. And again, I want to stress, not easy. None of it's easy. But the fundamentals haven't really changed, which is if I'm going to go on social media, I got to be willing to lean into subjects that traditionally you don't see. You take like Dustin's industry. He's in insurance. The most boring industry in the world, along with accountants. When I speak at an insurance conference, 90% of the people have the exact same outfit on. It's just hilarious, right? It's the funniest thing. Now, that industry is notoriously boring, slow, and soulless when it comes to their voice of the content that they produce. And so you got to say, well, we have to be willing to go against the grain. What's interesting today is oftentimes different is better than better.
Oh,
Yeah.
You are speaking my language.
And so that's the type of thing that we need to be thinking about, is how can I say it, show it, etc., in such a unique and different way that makes everybody say, isn't that interesting?
The other thing that came through in all the things you're talking about is the 2 words that always come to my head is trust and transparency. Right? You talk about how do you build trust and all the different ways in which you've done it, right? All came from a place of how can I just be more transparent than everyone else? And through that, building trust. I think one of the questions I have is
hold up on that, Dustin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Every company says they're transparent. It's total BS.
Yep.
It is utter BS. Because if they were transparent, they wouldn't be so afraid to talk about that thing that every buyer is going to ask them. Perfect case in point, insurance. Okay. In the insurance space, if you're talking to somebody, within a few minutes, they're going to say, now listen, Dustin, I'm not going to hold you to it, but just give me a sense here. Like, what are the rates that we're looking at? I mean, I know you're going to have to get back to me, but give me a sense.
Yeah.
And this is why companies like Geico come around and they just piss everybody off, right? Because they were able to quickly give you a quote faster. So they said, we're going to do it faster. That was their way of disruption. That was their way of innovation. Geico's insurance isn't better. In fact, when the stuff hits the fan, it's probably not going to be nearly as good as if you're working with a local agent. But the difference is that they allowed you to get a quote faster. And this is the thing when I say different is often better than better. Have you seen that beverage, Liquid Death? You seen that?
Yeah.
So it's hard to get in the beverage industry. Really hard. Because you're fighting for space. That's what you're fighting for. And when it comes to water, it's really hard to get into that space. So you tell me this. If you drank liquid death and you drank 10 other waters, would you, if it was blind, would you know the difference? 99% of people wouldn't know the difference. That's because the product isn't better. What'd they do? They put it in a freaking can. That's the first thing they did. Oh, I feel better about myself now. Okay, yeah, I'm not drinking plastic. Yay me, yay world, right? So that's the first thing they did. Then they said, let's give it an edge, right? Liquid death. Okay, we're going to market this like it's an energy drink. It's freaking water. It ain't better. It's different, right? And so when you go and bring your little brand to the market, whatever it is, you have to, and that's why, like, today, there's so much noise. Those that are willing to be different are the ones that are breaking the rules, and then the whole world's getting behind them and saying, man, I'm interested. I like that company. I like that brand. I like that person. What allowed me to speak professionally, like, as soon as I started getting stages, I was just getting tons of speaking events. Well, I walk into the crowd. Nobody does that in my industry, for the most part. Like 99 out of 100 speakers don't walk into the crowd. It is different. It makes someone say, I love that guy, or I don't like that guy. But it makes you feel something, right? And so that's what we have to be looking for as businesses and as brands. So I know I really interrupted you there, Dustin, but I had to go on a diatribe, so my apologies.
No, that is so perfect, because that's exactly where I was going with it, right? There's a lot of people that say they are aspiring to those things, but then they don't live by them. One of the key offshoots I was thinking about from a trust perspective. So you've also, you built teams, you built organizations. And so one of the things I think you've done an incredible job is talking about how you build trust with the market, right? Through transparency and honesty and things like that. I'm curious, as a leader, how did you do that same internally? Because, you built phenomenal businesses and phenomenal organizations. How did you do that internally as you continued to expand and grow?
Well, I have a book that's coming out after the third edition of The Ask You Answer, and it's about how to have breakthrough conversations and greater influence as a leader. So this is a subject that I'm actually really, really passionate about, and I could probably dive into it with a lot of depth. But let me just say this: when it comes to team, I'm not interested in the team saying, geez, Marcus is so smart. Most leaders, actually, that's what they yearn for. They want to feel smart with their team. When I have a team member that comes to me and asks me a question, my first question in my mind is always, do they have the answer to this? Because normally they've got an answer. In most cases, let's say something happened at your workplace. Somebody comes to you like, oh, boss, let's go. Oh, this happened. What should I do? They've got the answer. The problem is most leaders, most managers, most bosses, they give them the answer. So what's that teach them? You need something, you come to me. I'm your Google. I'm your hero. Who's not the hero? The person. There's no leadership development that way. So what I do exceptionally well is I teach people how to think. And the way that I do that is I understand how to ask questions at a level that most people just don't understand. When it comes to, let's say, problem solving, most conversations in the workplace are surface level. The reason why they're surface level is because we say things like, what do you think? Person gives their opinion, then we're done with that. We say, how's your day going? They say, it's going okay. And then we're done with that. That's not a conversation. There's no depth, right? So if you learn to have depth of conversation, it's a total game changer to your organization. But the only way you do that is you get incredibly curious. You release the need to be the smartest person in the room. You look to make your people the hero. And if you do that, what's interesting is you actually build the loyalty. You'll develop the leaders, and you'll have way less headaches, because now you're not going to be bombarded with text messages and emails every time there's a little problem, because, hey, guess what? You've trained them to learn how to figure out their own problems.
It's tremendous. It's such an interesting thing because, well, actually, I want to go one step further. So as you're asking that question, one of the challenges of a leader is you ask those questions, and sometimes they have the answer. Sometimes they don't. How do you take that next step to ask them further questions to help, not to coach, to guide, for them to think at that deeper level? To give you an example, I had a meeting with a team member today, and we're trying to develop an innovative tool, basically. And they took the first shot at it, and it's excellent, but it is extensive. And so from to your point, like customer and ease and things like that, it could take a while for the customer to be involved to actually get this thing completed. And so, I try to kind of go through a processing and questioning of, okay, but what's the customer going to think? What's their perspective? How are they going to feel? What are they looking to accomplish out of this? Not just, what's the benefit to us? But I'm curious if you have, whether it be framework or model or just kind of an approach on how you kind of get to that deeper level.
I got all types of frameworks. Indeed. It's how my brain works. And I think if you can't make it a framework, you actually don't know the thing well enough yet, right? And so there's essentially 4 pillars to the communication framework that I teach to leaders. One of the most significant pillars is what we call vanguarding. Now, vanguarding is the process. To give you some historical reference here, the vanguard portion of the Roman army was the part of the army that went into battle first. And when they went into battle, they formed a V, like at the tip of a spear or an arrow, okay? And so vanguarding is when you understand what could go wrong and you get in front of it. Because the greatest way in life to resolve a concern is to address it before it becomes a concern. Whenever there's a breakdown in any type of communication, any type of interaction, it's always because a vanguard, something that could have been prevented, was missed. Always, always. That's the reason. So let me give you some context here. Let's say you're going to have a one-on-one with someone, okay? And in that one-on-one, you immediately come out the gate and you ask them some really deep questions. And they're like, why are you asking me this? You didn't vanguard. You didn't get in front of it. You should have realized what could go wrong. So if you're going to be a world-class, like super communicator as a leader, you have to say, okay, what could go wrong? What's the doubt? What's the pushback? What's the friction that could come up? How do I get in front of it? So in the context of the one-on-one, for example, you always start with what we call the honest agreement. And actually, this is what we do in sales too. It doesn't really change, but it's just basic human interaction. So if I'm sitting down with you, Dustin, I may say something like this. So Dustin, before we get started, it's critical that today we're able to really get something accomplished and have some breakthroughs. In order to do that, we've got to commit to being incredibly honest and frank with each other. And so my commitment to you is I'm not going to hold anything back. I'm going to tell you exactly what I feel because I think you deserve that, and I think that's what you want. My ask for you is that you do the same thing, that you don't hold anything back. And I promise you, if whatever you say, it's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm here for it, and I'm not going to be defensive. So you have a green light to tell me exactly what's on your mind. So based on that, Dustin, are you willing to be incredibly honest and transparent with me in this conversation today? Dustin says, yes, right? That's the verbal commitment. That's your vanguard. Because that way, you now have set the conditions for extreme honesty, transparency, and I promise I'm not going to get pissed. I'm not going to get offended. I'm not going to get defensive. All the things this person is worried about, which is why they would hedge to tell you the truth. Which is why they would hedge to say, yeah, Dustin, that one thing you said the other day. No, now they're more likely to bring it up. That's vanguarding. Another example of vanguarding, all right? Have you ever asked a question to somebody and they said, where are you going with that? Or why are you asking me that? Okay, that's because you didn't vanguard the question well. Another example of vanguarding is if before you ask a particular question, you might say, now, before I ask this question, it's going to sound odd. It's going to seem like it's not going anywhere. I promise it has a purpose. And if we push through that, I promise we're going to have a breakthrough here. The person says, okay, I'll play. Now you ask the question. But if you hadn't have set it up with that vanguard, they're going to say, where the heck is this going? So that's an example. Let me give you one other just really important tip. So there is such a thing as a bad question and a perfect question. And a perfect question has 3 P's. 3 P's. The 3 P's to a perfect question. A little framework here for you that will change your life if you master this. So a great question, number 1, the receiver feels like progress is being made. That's number 1. First P, progress. They should feel progress. If they don't feel progress, they're going to get annoyed. Okay? Progress. Okay? Second one is purpose. They should feel like there is a reason for you asking the question. Again, this is why people say, where are you going with this? Or why are you asking that? Because it either lacks purpose or progress. The third P to the perfect question is what we call path. Now, path is where a lot of people screw up, especially, let's say, in sales environment or if you're doing a one-on-one. Path is when you present a question in such a way that it's very easy for the brain to find the answer. So, in other words, if I say to you, Dustin or Chris, if I say, what's your greatest memory? Man, that's a big question. Now, if I say, what's the greatest memory from your childhood? We're getting better. If I say, what's the greatest memory you have from your childhood with your mom? Now, all of a sudden, there's a clear path, and you can probably find it pretty quickly. You see what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times when we ask questions, someone gives us that tilt like, I'm confused. It lacked path. Brain couldn't find the answer very clearly, very easily. Now, as podcasters, you deal with this all the time, right? It's like you have asked questions before and you're like, probably wasn't the best question. It lacked one of the 3, usually path. It wasn't easy for them to find exactly, in terms of their brain, how to get there because it was a bit nebulous, the question itself, right? And that's always the goal. That's the cool thing about communication, whether it's podcasting, whether it's management, leadership, one-on-one, talking to a spouse, a loved one, etc. Like, that's the world that we're in. And that's a weird obsession that I have. So I think it's fun that you asked me this because I'm totally into this whole thing about leadership communication.
Yeah.
So most people don't know me for that, but I'm totally into it.
Tremendous. Oh, Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry. So, Marcus, you got me thinking. This leadership stuff you're talking about, your new book, does this world and the They Ask You Answer world ever collide or come together in harmony in marketing and business and leadership?
So communication, one of the struggles I've had, Chris, with my personal brand is that I tend to be interested in too many things. I like to talk about a lot of stuff. And the problem for that is, in my world as a speaker, I've had speaker bureau representatives come up to me before, the speaker, management companies, whatnot. They come up to me and they say, so help me understand, Marcus, are you a sales guy or are you a marketing guy? Which one? And that's because they want to put you in a box so that they can sell you, right? Which is good and it's bad. And so for me, what I realized, because I had so much interest in the communication, leadership, the marketing, and sales, it's like, okay, I understand what it is. There's a through line to all of it. I'm obsessed with communication that induces trust with the power of connection with an audience, right? And so I teach companies and brands how to connect with massive audiences. That's marketing, that's branding. I teach salespeople how to win the trust of a prospect quickly by making deep connections, mainly with the questions that they ask. That's called sales training. And I teach leaders how to connect with their teams and create more trust by asking perfect questions to have breakthrough moments and to increase the leadership skills of said team. So everything for me is about communicating in a way that connects and builds trust. That's it. We just call it different things at different times.
So where do you see this going, Marcus, right? So when you talk about kind of the different categories and between your speaking and your past books and impact and your next books, you see you're clearly someone that is always looking for that next frontier. So, curious, what's next? What's in the next 3 to 5 years for you?
Well, I'm going to continue to, pay attention to the market. The other thing about marketing in general is there's something really fascinating about watching how we behave as buyers and consumers, what they want, and therefore how we can connect with them. AI is a really big deal, and if you've noticed, I talk a lot about how you can use AI once again to connect with your audience and win trust. I don't have a clear 5-year plan at all. I just know that what I'm supposed to be doing is teaching the world what life has taught me. That's really it. I don't I'm not a guy that has a ton of strengths, but there's certain things that I am willing to recognize I do that extremely well. One of it is strategy, another is noticing patterns and they're aligned, right? And another is explaining something in a way that anybody can understand it. Right? Those are just like my core strengths. And so I'm going to lean into it. And I would say this too to anybody that's listening to this. It's really sad to me that I think society has taught many of us that, hey, we're supposed to be super humble and we're not supposed to recognize any of our strengths and we're not supposed to own it and all that stuff. And I'm like, man, if you've got a particular zone of genius, lean into it. Like it's okay to say, this is my thing. I knew when I was 21 years old that I was destined to be a professional speaker. There was no question in my mind. I also knew that I was a more effective communicator than most. I didn't know any of this other stuff was going to happen, right? I didn't know the pool thing was going to happen. I didn't know I was going to, travel the world and on these stages. I thought I was going to be a speaker, but I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew that's what I'm supposed to do. And it was just like a knowing. It wasn't like this thing of hey, I'm going to be a speaker because I'm awesome. It was like, I just know that this is my calling. This is my thing. I think most of us inherently sense our genius, our calling. We might not be willing to admit it to ourselves or to others, but it's there. And so I think one of the great keys to life is leaning into it, whatever it is. And I'm like, I'm going to own it. This is my thing, and I'm going to continue to talk about it. And as I talk about it, I realize what it is I'm actually trying to say. I actually wrote about that today on LinkedIn. It's like, man, I originally was very active on LinkedIn because I wanted more followers. And then I realized, man, this is stupid. The benefit of this is by me posting here, I'm figuring out what it is that I'm trying to say. I'm figuring out what resonates and doesn't resonate with the marketplace. And so this is my lab. This is my sandbox. This is about me. It's not about you. It's not about the connections. It's not about the network. It's not about the community. That's nice. But I am actually there because my brain needs an outlet to figure out what's next, to your point, Dustin. And that's one way that I do it. I got to create. If I'm not creating, I get grumpy, I get frustrated. And so that's the thing I need to feel like I'm doing because, again, I want to use the talent that I've been given. That's the talent that I've got.
So to go one step further, you talked about trust and you mentioned AI. And I think as I look forward in the next few years with AI, I think it's going to be really interesting about perhaps what the buyer thinks of trust going forward. Already, when people are getting emails or text messages, or your immediate brain is thinking, did someone actually send this to me or is this just AI? And so curious from your lens, as you look at, with all those different stakeholders, how you build trust, what impact do you think AI is going to have on just that disconnect of trust or that ability to build trust?
Well, I think it's going to increase trust and distrust at the same time. Because that's normally how these things work. Let me give you an example. There's going to be companies that attempt to have some communication with you through AI. You're going to pick it up immediately and you're going to say, I don't like those guys. They're out. Mm-hmm. I deal with it every day on LinkedIn. 10% of the comments I get on LinkedIn, I'm like, that's AI. You're dead to me, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm just not going to play with you at that point. Like, you're done. Yeah. We're done. Yeah. And so not only am I going to erase it, but I'm just not interested in having a relationship with you. And so that's increasing distrust. But then how are we going to use it to increase trust? I mean, there's so many ways. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is digital human chatbots. And it sounds kind of nerdy, but let me give you a vision of how I see this play out with my swimming pool company, for example.
Okay. Yep.
So I want within the next 18 months, and if this doesn't happen with 18 months, I'm pretty annoyed. I want you to come to the site. I want you to see someone that looks just like us, like you're on a Zoom call, right? They welcome you and they say, hi, Dustin, or they say, hi, visitor, whatever. Welcome to the River Pools website. This is digital Marcus. I'm not the real Marcus, but I'm using his brain. I've actually taken all the stuff he's ever written about pools, and I can now answer your questions. Now, we got two paths we can go down right now. If you want, we can just do a Q&A. You can ask me anything about pools, and I'm going to give you my best answer based on all of our content. Or I can give you a real-time quote if you would like one. Which would you prefer? And then they get the quote or they get the answers. Either way, I am cooking with gas. So, yes, I definitely want to be the first company in the world that is using a digital human to give real-time estimates, just as if one of my salespeople was doing a Zoom call giving you an estimate. That's what I want to achieve, and I think that increases trust. Because here's the key: number one, the person is going to look and sound like me or somebody on my team, right?
Yep.
So I think I actually want that to be the case. Number two, we're telling the person, I'm not real. You're not lying about it, right? I know there's a lot of companies already lying about it. Right? You can especially do that like on phone calls and stuff like that. But we're entering this world where we literally, for over 2,000 years, we've said, seeing's believing. Now we're not going to be able to say that. This phenomenon it actually has a name. It's called the reality paradox, where because everything can be faked, unless it's like literally in person in real life, we won't know if anything's true. I mean, we're going to get to a point where we'll literally, it's going to almost be impossible to know if something or someone is real, unless we're using like blockchain, which I think that's going to ultimately be the purpose for blockchain, is to verify stuff is real, because otherwise there's just going to be too many deep fakes out there.
Yeah.
I mean, now this sounds frustrating, but visually people have been fudging things for a long time. You know what I'm saying? I mean, think about every movie you've watched recently had green screen technology, it had AI. It's like, that stuff wasn't real. I don't know about you, but the last time I saw that, Big Mac on that commercial, it didn't look nothing like what I got at McDonald's. I mean, that's not a Big Mac, right?
No.
I love Dairy Queen. It makes me fat. That Blizzard on the picture is not what I get in my cup. But yet we roll with it, right? And that's just how it goes. So I it's really interesting. I am usually pretty good at seeing 3 to 5 years. Pretty decent at it. Man, I don't think anybody can see 5 years right now. Because instead of seeing around the turn, it's like literally seeing around 10 turns is what it is. There's a great phrase that I really, really love, because a lot of people are underselling, underestimating, underappreciating the impact of AI. Because there's like 5% of us that are totally into it, paying attention to it. And that's, the rest of the people are just like, yeah, let me know when I, need to know something here. It's like, they're just total laggards on it. But the reason why many are underselling it or underestimating it is because of the phrase, you can't fit the future in the containers of the past. And so what's happening is we're saying, well, the internet kind of took about 20 years to really rock and roll and everything. And, yeah, it happened slowly, but surely. It's like, this ain't the internet, guys. And this world is going to be a lot different. If you go from 1997, when email we called it electronic mail, became a thing, and the internet was, starting to pop off to, where we are 30 years later, almost 27 years later. It's changed a lot. The world's changed a lot, but like we still recognize the world, but it's changed a lot, man. It changed more than it did in the previous 100. Well, now in the next 5, it's going to change way more than it did in the previous 50. And then in the next year after that, it's going to change more than it did. See, it's just like, that's the thing. AI years and human years are very, very different. It's stunningly different. We're not talking like dogs here, y'all. I mean, we're talking like 100 to 1. That's what's so crazy about AI, especially once we reach, artificial general intelligence, and then it's like, holy crap, there's Neo. What am I going to do now? But I'm looking forward to it. I'm a glass half full type of guy, and you better believe I'm going to take advantage of it. I'm not going to sit around and complain about it. And I'm not going to also say, let me know how it goes. I'm going to get in the sandbox. I'm going to play. I'm going to figure it out.
Yep.
In fact, check it out. I got a new app that I built with AI. It's called PriceGuide.ai. It's a real-time pricing calculator for your website that anybody can put on their website. And in less than 30 minutes, you can give your visitors an estimate or price for that product or service that you sell. The great thing is it's like super easy. It's like totally basic. Anybody can put it up on their site immediately. Use this AI to help you with the questions and help you with the experience. But I'm already, I just launched it. I've already got paying customers, and they're like, dude, Marcus, I'm getting a crazy amount of leads. I'm like, I know, because if you actually give your visitors what they want, it's amazing that they'll give you their information. So it's exciting times, man. I'm totally into it.
Love it.
Okay, Marcus. So if someone's listening to this, whether they've read the book or not, one of the things that I've come across in old school businesses is that there's a portion of the population that says, we need to hold all the information internally. We can't give away the farm. We can't give away that information because then they've got no reason to call us. How do you get buy-in? And that may be a whole nother conversation too with the pushback, but how do you get some people in your team, on your company to say, let's give it a shot?
Yeah, it's that open versus closed source mindset, right? Scarcity versus abundance mentality. One story that's always stuck with me comes from Geek Squad. You ever heard of Geek Squad? They fix your computers and stuff. And they have a lot of content that teaches people how to fix their computers and stuff. Somebody once went to their CEO and said, aren't you cutting off your nose about your face here? I mean, kind of hurting yourself with your potential customers. He says, don't you know my number one customer is the one that tries to do it themselves? I was like, yes, right? And that's what an abundance mentality is. I remember when I started doing pool videos, and I was like, let's show them how to open and close their pools. And my service manager was like, we don't want to show them that because that means they're not going to need us. I'm like, no, they're going to see that it sucks. And they're going to say, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? Yeah. I mean, this is how it works. Besides that, you have to have the mindset of people aren't dumb. They might start off as uninformed, but eventually they're going to become informed. And so if you just say, you know what, they're going to get this information. They're going to get it from me, or they're going to get it from somebody else. Which would you prefer? I don't know anybody that's ever said, well, I'd rather them get it from my competitor. Oh, man. No, I want to own every conversation. And so that means you got to be willing to talk about what others aren't willing to talk about. You got to be willing to show what others aren't willing to show. You got to be willing to sell in a way that others aren't willing to sell.
I love that. And what I would say too, on top of that, is what is the worst that could happen by you doing a top 10 or top 5, listing your competitors? What is the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah. By the way, when you do those, don't say anything bad about anybody. Okay? I'm not espousing that if you're listening to this. I mean, literally, just say a couple positive things they probably even say about themselves. Undisputable facts. You know what happened to me one time? It's crazy. I've written that article about best pool builders in Richmond, Virginia. Then I went to a swimming pool conference. And of course, I was killing it off that article, man, because I was ranking for all my competitors and stuff, and getting a lot of leads from it. And I was just like, man, this is so funny. And I went to a conference, and this one competitor that was listed on one of those articles comes up to me. He's like, man, Marcus, I don't know why you included us in that article, but thank you. And I'm thinking, no, thank you. Right? So yeah, that's how it works, man. That's disruption, baby. It's the most fun. It really is. I just love it. I love taking industry, flipping on its head, because here's what we know to be true. In every industry, there's leaders, right? And those leaders oftentimes get complacent. Somebody comes in and they become what I would call a rule breaker. And at first the leader complains, but the market says, this is awesome. I love it. And eventually the market says, I want this all the time. And because they want it all the time, now the rule breaker becomes the rule maker. And that leader from before, now they become the follower. And the cycle starts all over again, right? So be a rule breaker in your industry. That's the message. And if you do that, and most aren't willing to do that, you got the courage and strength to do it, the creativity to do it. You're going to make waves, and people are going to recognize your brand. And I think you're going to achieve some pretty exceptional things.
I think what you're also saying is being an early adapter is almost always a good thing. Be first to AI, be first to TikTok, try it out. And again, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, it doesn't do you any good to sit there and complain about it. I learned a long time ago to never let my opinions dictate smart business decisions. I don't care about my opinions. I don't like TikTok. I don't really like social media. I think it's killing our kids. Yet, I use it for business because I am meeting the buyer where they are. And if they're going to be on the platforms, which they are, then they might as well consume my stuff.
Sure.
I love that. That is a deep and powerful way to end. Marcus, thank you so much for being on the show today. Before we let you go, can you tell our listeners where they can find you and your book and what else you might have going on?
Yeah, they ask you answer. You can get it anywhere. The third edition, it won't be out for a while. It's going to be out probably in January. It's called Endless Customers. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm a great connection there. And check out my tool, priceguy.ai. If you want to start generating immediate leads in the next 30 minutes that you could be getting, but you're not, check it out, priceguy.ai. Pretty awesome. You can get a free trial for 2 weeks and no credit card required, which is pretty dang cool because we're so transparent and we eat our own dog food.
I love that. That is amazing. Great conversation. I loved it. Folks, you heard it. Go get the book. And I tell you this, not just because you're here, but being someone who's worked in the marketing space for a long time, it is one of the best marketing books I've ever read. So go grab a copy. You will come back and thank me later. I promise you that. And thanks for listening to another episode. We appreciate the ears. Until next time, peace.